Hi guys, it's Mage, and this is Black and White Thinking. Today's video is a pretty low effort one, so please forgive me. When the right are allowed stupid opinions publicly, God knows I'm gonna have one too. Today I want to talk about another absolutely insane piece of trans panic trash writing, originally picked up by the Telegraph here in the UK, the Tory graph as my mother would call it. A piece that has sparked up the stupidest stories and reporting I have read since, well, last time, points to my video about BBC News being terrible. What we are going to talk about is such a joke that I thought we all might have a good laugh about it as I rant about its ridiculousness. The vocal minority of right-wing journalists in this country are an abomination, and it's always fun to point that out whilst potentially making a few genuine points along the way about their dangerous queerphobic rhetoric and why the Tories suck and should be destroyed. It's going to be hard to make these points whilst not getting distracted by the absolute idiocy at play in what we are about to discuss. But yeah, let's talk about the dumbest thing I've seen in the British media in a while, which is really saying something if you know anything about the British media. If you like shitty videos like this, or are perhaps a fan of my longer ones, of which I have many already done and uploaded and many more on the way, please consider subscribing to the channel or giving this video a like. All the things that appease the algorithm gods here on YouTube. If you're really interested in what bullshit I have to share with the world, please consider checking out my Patreon too. I post my sources there earlier for my bigger essays, general reading lists, early looks at my scripts and thumbnails, and once I have more than a 3-person audience over there, I will start uploading some extra tidbits video-wise. I'm also getting married in 3 months, so if you ever wanted to support me now would be a great time. Also, kind of a random side note, but my next big essay, like new one, not a part 2, will probably be like 5 hours long, and I will probably be recording it with a camera for the first time and like using my face. So if you want to follow that nonsense as I try it out, Patreon is the place to be for that. Awkwardness over, thank you all for being here as always. Moving swiftly on. So there is this walking Roald Dahl character here in the UK called Catherine Burrows, a real Miss Trunchbull, a real Dolores Umbridge, which I guess is ironic given the subject matter. She is this once headmistress who keeps showing up in the news cycle for being, well, really abusive to her students, especially if they are poor, and for being basically a literal fascist right-wing loser. She was recently at this right-wing, word starting with N and ending with I that I can't say, conference, the National Conservatism Conference, giving a speech about how conservative parents should remove their children from woke schools. She is an arsehole, a capital A, full of self-loathing piece of work, always showing up on daytime British television to parrot right-wing talking points like the leopards would not eat her face given half the chance. This woman is literally famous for giving poor kids detention and separating them from their classmates if they couldn't afford to eat. She's scum. Anyway, she recently featured in the Tory graph being interviewed about woke schooling once again, using her I was once an abusive teacher credentials, and in this interview she made a big song and dance about how she has heard from other teachers and those in the profession about, and this sounds so stupid to say aloud, especially considering she said it with no sense of irony. She made a big song and dance about the supposed fact that children in the UK are now identifying as cats and as holograms, and that they are being supported by this by their teachers, and that this is an indicator of the fact that trans rights are being taken far too seriously. And I am not kidding when I say that this was not only touted in the Tory graph like it was a fact, and then turned somehow into a story about how the LGBT lobby has gone too far, thanks Rowling, but also picked up by other news sources. GB News, which is basically Fox News for populist Brits, had hours of coverage on this matter. But even non-right-wing news sources were discussing this, and Burrows was on Twitter all week defending her so-called facts and posting anonymous screenshots of messages she had been supposedly sent by concerned parents of children who knew other children who identified as literal animals, or apparently, again, holograms. But the Tory graph was far the worst for this, and it has kept them in disposable headlines for over a week now. They wrote article after article after article talking about how kids all over the UK were being allowed to identify as animals, and that this apparently was an expression of gender that was warping children's minds, and that schools had, in fact, gone too woke. One of these articles literally made me laugh out loud, and I've got to share some of it with you guys just to show you how insane these people actually sound. But in a moment, because I want to provide a little context that is less funny and actually pissed me off. So in the heat of all this absolute fucking nonsense, Burrows Singh actually name-dropped a school, a high school / secondary school, which means it caters to kids 11 to 16, and damn does this not take the whole situation to a totally new level of BS. She named a school, which I will avoid naming here because safeguarding children does actually matter, and naming schools so they can be dragged through the national press based off the back of a lie isn't actually cool, Miss Catherine. But this school is actually fairly close to my hometown. It is in my home county, and in a really small, quaint little town I spent a fair amount of time in as a child. Just on a personal level, that really wound me up. But this school was named, again, off the back of a blatant lie made up by an abusive ex-teacher with fascist intent who has been running around the media desperately clawing at any fame she can for the last few years, and that's really dangerous. This naming of a school puts it in the direct crosshairs of fascist rhetoric, and worst, fascist action. And as we are all aware in these trying times, fascist actions are deadly, and they will get people killed. This is a direct way that Burrows Singh has chosen to harm children and expose them and their caregivers to a torrent of bullshit of which they will struggle to recover from. And the worst part, our wannabe fascist but too stupid to enact it government, run by the far right wing of the Conservative Party, decided to get involved with this in a way that is both unfair and atrociously unethical. Based off of lies printed in their favourite paper, Boris Johnson once referred to the Telegraph as his real boss, the Conservative Party, the Tories, specifically the Education Secretary Gillian Keegan and Kemi Badenoch, the Energy Secretary, don't know why she's getting involved, decided to write to Ofsted and demand that the school in question have a full inspection done to ensure that no children are holograms, and if they are not supported, but instead lambasted, labelled as crazy, and that their family lives are intervened in, because clearly any child saying something like this, which I stress they literally aren't anyway, deserves to have an independent body turned against them at the hand of the government, who has no right to tell Ofsted what to do and how to do it. For context, Ofsted is a regulatory group in the UK which inspects schools and social services care and things like that. Entirely independent, or at least supposed to be, and they do these examinations in order to apparently safeguard and assess how well these places are doing in regards to caring for children. There are plenty of issues with Ofsted outside of this debacle, and lots of people, especially teachers, actually think they cause more harm than good when it comes to their use of a rating system that treats all institutions and school environments as one in the same. They have their own controversies, which often have led them to lambasting individuals who are just trying their best with what they have been given. Teachers, usually from poor areas with little funding and guidance from their local government. And this has led people to literally self-delete. Okay, I'm ranting now. I'm getting triggered like the snowflake I am. Let's get back on track because I guess I have 3 things I really wanted to say about this whole situation, so let me say them. Are children identifying as animals? That article I was talking about, one of the many printed by the Telegraph this week, as I said, is absolutely ridiculous. Let me quote it to you all. It focuses a little on the total lie about this specific school affirming a child as cat-gendered and punishing other students for disagreeing. I think this is a lie. I know it's a lie. And again, I don't want to put the school at any more risk, so I'm going to talk around these parts a little, so bear that in mind. Otherwise, this is verbatim, just with the odd line omitted, and I will put that on screen for you all to see. A school at the centre of a row over children identifying as animals is facing a government investigation, the Telegraph can reveal. Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, is understood to have ordered an investigation into the school. The Telegraph has revealed that at other schools, teachers are allowing children to identify as horses, dinosaurs, and even moons. On Tuesday, Downing Street, the Prime Minister's office, told head teachers that they should not be teaching children that they can identify as cats or any other animals. A source close to Miss Keegan said, teachers should not be teaching contested ideology as fact. They must have due regard to safeguarding if a pupil identifies as an animal. The Telegraph can reveal that teaching assistants at other schools are taking children who identify as horses out cantering and feeding strips of meat to those who consider themselves to be dinosaurs. On Tuesday, a spokesman for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, said children should not be taught contested opinions as facts and said they should not be influenced by the personal views of teachers when discussing transgender issues. Sorry, how is this a transgender issue? How is being a dinosaur a transgender issue? Anyway, I'm sorry, but that line about taking children who identify as horses out cantering and feeding strips of meat to those who consider themselves to be dinosaurs has absolutely ruined me. How is anyone supposed to take this seriously? I can't even get through quoting it without literally laughing. Like, on what planet would this ever be happening? This is such a blatant lie, and it reads as practically absurdist. It's so unbelievable. Children don't identify as the moon, and the fact that the right are having to use shit like this to dog whistle against trans and generally queer rights shows you just how absolutely desperate and transparent they are. Anyone who believes this probably also believes that the Earth is flat and the liberal elite world order is forcing microchips into our bodies via vaccines. It is farcical and would be nothing but hilarious if it wasn't actually being used to fuel a fire that has not really existed until recent years in the UK. It's also been said by the school that was specifically named in this whole situation that none of this ever happened and that this is all false reporting, so I'm just gonna trust them on this one, sorry. To answer my own question, posited in the title, are children identifying as cats, or dinosaurs, or the fucking moon? No, the right are just running out of reasons to make you hate queer people. They know they have no truthful leg to stand on in this argument, so they have taken to simply lying in the hopes of starting a culture war, largely in part to attempt to scapegoat queer people in order to distract from their own economic and social failures, a classically British tactic that has happened many times before. Does it matter if children say dumb shit? I think this is an important point to make because a lot of this video focuses on arguing against a lie, and philosophically, that is just pointless, right? You cannot fight fascist lies with the truth. They don't care about facts, no matter how often they say they do. They do not care about honesty or integrity. They care about power and gaining as much of it over as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. They usually do this by trying to turn ordinary people against each other so we no longer trust our neighbours, and in turn trust the authorities that care little for us instead because we are aggressively blaming another little man for all of our problems. It's like fascism 101. So more broadly, I want to make the point, does it fucking matter if a 12-year-old identifies as a dinosaur? I mean, a dinosaur isn't a gender, so this isn't even a real issue of queerness, no matter how many times these people make that argument. They're just using it to blatantly scapegoat trans people because they are a hot topic minority to fire ammo at right now. At least they are in relation to the governments in the UK and the US. If children say silly stuff because they are children, does it matter? I mean, when I was at secondary school, there were plenty of girls who wore cat ears and roared because they were dinosaurs. It was a literal trend back in the emo days, and you know what? It doesn't fucking matter. Those people are all 30 now, living fairly average lives. People be furries, teenagers be teenagers, the world keeps turning and no damage is done to society in any meaningful way. I mean, without going into too much detail about either of them, I have two teenagers in my life right now, both LGBT. One who is affirmed in their sexuality, has known their label for years now, and does not tend to waver on this. The other changes pronouns, gender identity, and sexuality every week. And it doesn't fucking matter, because they are children, and children should be allowed to imagine. They should be allowed to lie creatively. They should be allowed to say stupid shit whenever they want without the threat of the government's involvement because they are children. Children should always be children, and adults should always be adults. And sometimes that means, as adults, we have to accept that children do and say dumb shit as they are discovering themselves and their place in a world that is increasingly volatile. They should be allowed space to be messy and uncertain, and most of all, fucking weird. I mean, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be American. I wanted to be Ashley Tisdale. I wanted to be a cheerleader with long blonde hair and a jock boyfriend and dreams of making it big in New York or LA. I wanted to fail at those dreams and become a playgirl. I wanted to marry an NFL player and live in the valley. Teenagers are dumb and full of uncertainty, and I personally think that's a good thing. Even if all of this was true, which it obviously isn't, who cares? Won't somebody please think of the children? Alright, final points on this little video before I wrap this up, because I am writing, recording, editing and uploading this video in one 6-hour session, because I definitely owe you all content, and I'm also catching a flight in 48 hours and will not be able to enjoy a week off without knowing I put something out into the world. I write a lot, but it's all slow coming, so anyway. One of the biggest issues I have found with this whole thing, outside of the absurdity of the lie being used as a weapon against trans people, is the fact that people, the right-wing losers who are perpetuating this whole thing, are claiming they are doing so for children. Because like where? There is no protection for children, queer or otherwise, when one school is being targeted by the right-wing press, by the government, and all their right-wing cronies. And the Tory party has a particularly bad record in regards to protecting anyone, especially children. I would know that as a child who grew up under a Tory government. The Tory party doesn't care about children. 200 refugee children have been kidnapped in the same county that this school is in this year, and the Tories don't give a shit. The Tories are actively anti-children. They do not care. And this whole argument is so reminiscent of the beginning of the implementation of Section 28, which I talk about in my It's a Sin video if you're interested. Back in the 80s, and the anti-LGBT tirade that was started and promoted by people like Margaret Thatcher. When I hear the Prime Minister or any of his cabinet talking about how children shouldn't be taught to identify a certain way and how teachers should not support their queer students, I am instantly taken back and reminded of Mrs. Thatcher saying this.
But it's the plight of individual boys and girls which worries me most. Too often, our children don't get the education they need, the education they deserve. And in the inner cities, where youngsters must have a decent education if they are to have a better future, that opportunity is all too often snatched from them by hard left education authorities and extremist teachers. And children who need to be able to count and multiply are learning anti-racist mathematics, whatever that may be. Children who need to be able to express themselves in clear English are being taught political slogans. Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
And whilst this whole situation is farcical, this should worry us because, as I've said before, these fascists and fascist wannabes are desperate, and they are willing to risk the lives of children in their war against freedom and equality. Because that's what this is, a direct attack on the freedoms of children to be children. They can try to frame their opinions as protecting children all they like, but it doesn't make it true, especially when history has proven their rhetoric as dangerous and aligned with authoritarianism again and again and again. We don't even have to look that far back into history to see this. Anyone with a vague knowledge of how the National Socialist Party came to power and was kept in power in 1930s, 1940s Germany will know that it began with the dehumanization of refugees, of foreigners, and the LGBT community. Specifically those who were advocating for the rights of trans people to have support and medical care that would make them live stronger and happier lives. And the Tory party and their Greek chorus of arseholes have been advocating for all of this anti-human BS for decades now. They are a joke, but they are also a threat. And this kind of behaviour and potential legislation, this kind of government must be resisted. It must be challenged, it must be unseated, and it must be fought against. That is how we protect children.